Hi, I'm Arun George, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In today's episode, we're looking at a border dispute between India and Nepal that, after fermenting for weeks, reached a fresh peak on Sunday when Nepal's law minister moved a constitutional amendment in the nation's parliament. If passed, the bill will approve the recent political map published by the country's government. Yubiraj Ghimire, who writes on Nepal for the Indian Express, explains what the bill aims to do.
Today, the Minister for Law, Sivabhai Tumma she moved the constitutional amendment bill that is basically in conformity with the letter and spirit in which the government published new official map of the country about a week ago. That means that they have already included this Limpiadura, Lipu Lake, and Kalapani in the trijunction of Nepal, India, and China, the Tibets. So they have included in Nepal's map as well because it's been now a disputed territory. There's a dispute over the territory between India and Nepal. So it was not there earlier in the map of Nepal. So they have included it. And because the constitution of Nepal, which was promulgated in 2015, September, it said that the map of Nepal or the territory of Nepal would be what is mentioned in the map on the day the constitution is published. And since these areas were not there in the map on the day the constitution was published, and now there is dispute, they have included this part in the territory. That's why the constitution amendment was necessitated. Two, Nepal's national emblem also has the map of the country. So that map in the national emblem also needs to be amended. So the constitutional amendment introduced in Parliament today had twin purposes.
What this will effectively do is add an additional 370 square kilometers of territory to Nepal. India's map also features the same 370 square kilometers, which is approximately a quarter of the area occupied by national capital Delhi. Both India and Nepal presently claim the territories of Kalapani, Limpiadhura, and Lipulek lie within their national boundaries. This disputed area lies in the Indian state of Uttarakhand along the border with Nepal and in the Indian district of Pithoradgarh. But how did the two nations with open borders, trade, and long-standing diplomatic ties end up in this situation? Yubraj explains that the dispute over the area is a long-standing one for Nepal.
There's a long history of that, but this began sometimes in the 90s, early 90s. Political debate started here that territories which are there, which are part of Nepal, as recognized by the Treaty of 1816, when Nepal lost some territory to British East India Company, and the new boundary was defined. As per that boundary, there were certain areas that belonged to Nepal, but they were missing. They recognized it, they realized it. It began as an internal political debate in the 90s. Then it was taken up with India simultaneously in 2000. I think it was 2000 July when G.P. Koirala was the Prime Minister here and Atal Bihari Vajpayee in India. It was taken up, it was discussed at the Prime Minister's level, and both sides decided that a mechanism with the foreign secretaries of the two sides supervising it would settle the issue based on facts, documents, and other evidences in a spirit of friendliness. That was the understanding, but it didn't make much headway.
Things only got worse when India and China signed an agreement in 2015.
It took a new turn in 2015 May when Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his counterpart, Chinese counterpart Li Keqiang, they signed an agreement saying that this Lipu Lake area, it will be developed into a commercial hub, or road will be built passing through it for commercial and pilgrimage process. So Nepal lodged a protest at that point of time saying it was our territory and both you countries, you chose not to consult and not to seek our consent. That was 2015 May. And now India abrogating Article 370, which resulted in the bifurcation of Jammu and Kashmir as two union territories instead of a state with special privilege. When the government of India published a new map, with new status of Jammu and Kashmir, these areas in Kalapan, that Kalapani, Lipulek, and Lipgadra, they were included there as part of India, and that triggered Nepal saying, like this was disputed territory, it had included in their map. So that is how the current controversy began.
Shubhajit Roy, who covers India's foreign affairs for the Indian Express, explained how a political map released by India in 2019 added further fuel to the fire.
After the special status under the Article 370 was revoked in Parliament, the government had issued a set of new maps in the month of November. And those maps, once again reiterated India's claim on the Kalapani area. And it actually maintained what it has always maintained earlier, that it's part of India's territory. Subsequently, a map was released by the Indian government on the, I think, 7th or 8th of November, where they did away with the name of the river Kali. Now, the origin of the current controversies actually started then when the Nepalese politicians and Nepalese government authorities, they noticed this change in the absence of the name of river Kali on the map. And because now you had a much more assertive government under Prime Minister Oli, the Nepalese government decided to assert its claim, its territorial claim, on what it considers is a disputed territory. So that's how the situation unraveled. And by February, March, the rhetoric from the Nepalese side increased, with Mr. Oli, he facing some leadership challenge from one of his party leaders, who's also a former prime minister, Mr. Prachanda, Pushpa Kamal Dahal Prachanda. And therefore, there was a leadership challenge, and that led Mr. Oli to assert the claim for this Kalapani and raise the issue of this map and this territorial claim once again.
On the 8th of May, India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh inaugurated a road that goes up to the Lipulek Pass. While inaugurating it, Singh said that the road was important for strategic, religious, and trade reasons. The 80-kilometer long road goes right up to the Lipulek Pass on the line of actual control. Pilgrims headed to the Kailash Mansarovar, revered as the abode of Lord Shiva, travel to China through this pass. Shubhajit explains the importance of this road.
So India has been building infrastructure and upgrading infrastructure along the border road. And as you know, this particular road had been used by Indian pilgrims to get to Kailash Mansarovar for the yatra that Indian pilgrims undertake. So India basically kind of built the road for the convenience of the Indian pilgrims. And also, since it leads up to the border with China, so therefore it also has a strategic value as well. That's why India had built this particular road, because of these two reasons, because to ease the travel of pilgrims, and also because it has a strategic advantage, it has strategic use. Therefore right now, after China saw this buildup of infrastructure, it actually makes that place much more accessible to Indian troops than before. Nepal also sees it the same way, and therefore there is an alarm that has been raised by Kathmandu. Beijing has so far been very quiet on this particular issue.
On the day the road was inaugurated, there were protests in Nepal. The Indian Army chief's comment that Nepal might have raised this problem at the behest of someone else only raised temperatures further. The history of how this territory was divided goes back to the 19th century. Yubraj says that the Nepal kingdom in the 19th century stretched from Kangra in present-day Himachal Pradesh to the Teesta River in the east in present-day West Bengal. After a 2-year battle against the East India Company that started in 1814, it was decided at the Treaty of Sugauli that was signed between the two warring parties how the border would be demarcated. Nepal says that the source of the Mahakali River, which decided the border between India and Nepal, was subsequently manipulated by the British, causing them to lose more territory. Yubraj says another version about how the territory was claimed by India is based on what 93-year-old Bishwabandhu Thapa has to say. Thapa was a former Home Minister of Nepal in 1962.
Bishwabandhu Thapa, who is now 93, and he was Home Minister in the cabinet of King Mahendra when India and China fought war in 1962. He says that after the setback that India suffered in that war, Nehru wrote to King Mahendra saying that this is a very strategically important place for us to stop Chinese from getting into India, and requesting that India would like to have its security forces deployed there. So it was the two major factors that probably could have influenced the decision of King Mahendra. He said, okay, temporarily India can use it, because what we've seen is when vital interests of India and China have directly clashed, Nepal's monarchs have almost always sided with India. Two, there were also Gorkhas fighting for India against China. So naturally, because there were Nepalese people also involved in that war, so on a temporary basis, King Mahendra granted permission to Prime Minister Nehru as a temporary basis. But at the same time, according to Thapa, he also, sent Thapa to China to inform the Chinese that we have given this border, this, border point to India for this reason. Because Nepal also wanted to have a balanced relation with the two neighbors, although surrounded by India in three sides and China one side. So this is the nearest authentic explanation from Nepali side, apart from the fact that they have copies of the treaty and some maps which Nepal government says it substantiates its claim.
Yuvraj says that people are believed to have paid land revenue to Nepal till around 1962 and were even included in the nation's census at one time.
Until about 1962-63, these people used to pay the land revenue and to Nepal, and also that area the population was included in the census conducted by the government of Nepal. But then apparently in the year that followed, there's areas where the Nepal government didn't have any presence there in the years that followed. We don't know why.
Former Home Minister Thapa also claims that there's a letter between Nehru and King Mahendra that substantiates how Lipul Lake ended up with India. But Yuvraj says there's no evidence that this letter has ever made it to a negotiating table between the two nations. So how did India, which has such deep ties with Nepal, reach this scenario? Yuvraj says that India's role in the 2006 peace deal with Maoists and the end of the monarchy in Nepal that was achieved with the help of the European Union and the US also raised China's interest in the nation. He says due to this, China subsequently increased its presence and investments in the nation over a decade. But Yuvraj says that India's perception that China is behind every action of Nepal isn't taken very well there.
Indian perception in Nepal is because India had monopoly. India was not only a factor, but also an actor in Nepal's internal politics in a decisive manner until before 2006 when this change took place. Now that role of India's, I would call it acceptability, but India is not that effective player as it used to be, but it has a perception that anything that happens in Nepal, any movement or protest against India, is China supported. That is not the case because Nepal, a whole lot of political forces, social forces, they are concerned about the independence of their country and also believe that the interference by international community in 2006 political change was a mistake because by that Nepal surrendered its sovereign component to outsiders to dictate politics. So now India is being criticized for that. People to some extent support China because China has in a way countered India, but that doesn't mean that they want China to replace India in that manner.
And it hasn't helped that India's relationship with Nepal has seen a decline in the last few years.
Well, it's been pretty rocky in the last few years, especially if you remember in 2015 when India was seen to be sort of influencing the constitution drafting, and as the constitution, the new constitution of Nepal was seen to be discriminatory towards the Madhesis who live in the Terai region and that share the border with India. India was blamed for what was called a blockade of services and goods to Nepal. And that really fueled the politics of Nepal against India. And the anti India sentiment really shot up. And Mr. Oli has really made that his trump card by raising this anti India sentiments over the last 5-6 years. And therefore, the current particular atmosphere and politics and this map making and asserting the claims is part of this broader narrative where Nepal feels it's been bullied by India. India feels that it's been much more accommodative towards Nepal. But this time, there is a third player in town, which is China, which is playing a much active role in strategically in Nepal by engaging with the Nepal's political parties, as I said, the Communist Party of Nepal. And we saw evidence of that active role being played by the Chinese ambassador to Nepal recently when Mr. Oli faced the leadership challenge within his party. The Chinese ambassador to Nepal, she played a very active role in quietening down the rebellion against Mr. Oli. So it's all a very complex set of factors being at play in India's neighborhood. And therefore, Indian diplomacy now will have to factor in this new factor of China, a much more active China in Nepal.
Yubraj points out that China's rising influence isn't even a surprise in Nepal anymore.
When you hear about Chinese ambassador being very active to save the Oli government, when Prime Minister Oli was facing crisis within the party, that is nothing that raises eyebrows in Nepal anymore. China was a reluctant political player earlier in the past 15 years, ostensibly to counter forces like India, America, Europe, which are involved in politics, policy making. China is present in a big way.
Yubraj was referring to a meeting between the Chinese ambassador in Kathmandu and leaders within the ruling Nepal Communist Party. The ambassador held closed-door meetings with the Prime Minister and former Prime Ministers Pushpa Kamal Dahal and senior leader Madhav Kumar Nepal in early May. The meetings were held at a time that the ruling party was pushing for a change in the regime. And suddenly, instead of a split in the party, it united behind Prime Minister Oli.
China's very clear message to dissidents within the ruling Nepal Communist Party that Communist Party is rule in Nepal and Oli's leadership is the best guarantee at the moment for China to cooperate in Nepal's prosperity and development. That May 1 meeting that Chinese ambassador Hao Yangshi had with dissident leaders of the ruling party, both former Prime Minister Madhav Kumar Nepal and Prachanda, helped Oli to retain power for some time. But at the same time, the opening of the road on May 8 by Defense Minister Rajnath Singh and the subsequent reaction that followed in Nepal has helped Oli a lot, again, on this nationalistic kind of issue to continue. We don't know for how long. There is problem within the party. There are other issues that divides the ruling party. But despite all those differences within the ruling party, I think Oli is safe at the moment. I don't know, for a month, for 2 months.
Yubraj also explained why the opposition parties had united behind the government on the issue.
Because this is a territorial issue, an emotive issue. All political parties and forces would be together on that. But the emphasis still is that this issue should be settled through negotiation across the table. That is the official or the stated position of India, as I understand. That is also the stated position of Nepal. Only thing is, here, what the people are not liking or even criticizing is the way Prime Minister, presented the case in Parliament, even berating India's national emblem, making certain comment on, Indian virus are more lethal and all that. That is something people didn't like. But on this territorial issue, which is also, as I told you, an emotive issue, they would be one on that.
But now that the bill has been tabled, what's the path forward for India and Nepal to resolve the issue?
India has said in its statements that it's a very fluid situation and this particular border issue needs to be handled with some kind of seriousness and in an atmosphere of trust. So my sense is that diplomats would be at work by now between the two sides and would try to calm down the temperature and talk to each other more sensitively on this issue, because India cannot afford to have an unstable Nepal, an angry Nepal at its doorstep. Similarly, Nepal, which always feels that it's not just landlocked country, it is what in Nepal they call India locked country. That particular feeling of being bullied by a bigger neighbor, India has to sort of reach out to them, reach out to the Nepalese politicians, Nepalese establishment, as well as the people of Nepal, to make them feel as an equal partner and not of an unequal relationship, which has become the real problem in this particular relationship because of size, because of geography. Nepal feels much more bullied and threatened by India. And India has to show that it is not a bully, it's not a big brother. As former External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj had once said, that India is not a big brother to Nepal because big brother has very negative connotations. India is an elder brother to Nepal, which has a much more positive and much more benign connotation. So my sense is that right now India would be moving diplomacy forward and taking steps to talk to Nepal to address its misgivings and sort of resolve this issue and calm down the temperature, because the two countries share an open border, a porous border, and India cannot afford to have a disturbed, unstable Nepal with a porous and open border.
Shubhajit says that the challenge for India is that the rhetoric in Nepal has largely been anti-India, and there are few political players who are speaking in favor of it. Even opposition parties like the Nepal Congress Party, which is an old ally, haven't supported India on this cause.
India has no real friends and nobody speaking up for them is a huge issue or huge challenge for Indians right now. So Indian diplomats need to find friends, and to find friends, you have to build trust. So I think to overcome this need to build trust and to bridge the trust deficit is the major task, major challenge right now in front of the Indian diplomats.
Yubraj also says that the only solution lies in active diplomacy, and it's important to resolve this issue now.
As far as Nepal is concerned, for India as well as Nepal, it won't affect their claim over the boundary. One of the two is definitely not going to prove right when sincere and serious evidence-based negotiation take place. So I think if taken positively, that would force both countries to settle this issue at the earliest in a time-bound manner, like opening the dialogue as soon as possible. India has said immediately after the corona situation eases out, India would be willing to hold this negotiation, and I think Nepal would also be joining that. And so it basically only emphasizes the urgency to hold negotiation instead of raising temperature outside, away from the negotiating table. The fact that they have been able to sort out 98%, as both sides have claimed, 98% of the border, only 2-3 major border disputes remain. There is no reason why they can't sort it out. Only problem would be if you don't sort it now, for future generation, it will be much complicated and more emotive issues difficult to settle.
You were listening to Three Things by The Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer Joshua Thomas. If you like the show, then do subscribe to it wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a rating or review. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet to us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.